Dear friends, welcome to another current episode of Now in the Military World. In this video, we will discuss indications that point to the proximity of the implementation of martial law in Russia. In the event of its activation, we will delve into the implications and the impact that this measure could have regarding the potential Russian incursion into Ukraine. In the Russian nation, the activation of martial law is reserved for situations of extreme seriousness and specific nature, an external aggression directed at Russian territory, or at least a threat that is substantial and plausible. It is important not to confuse the application of martial law in Russia with the imposition of a state of emergency, which is mobilized only in response to internal crises and threats such as natural disasters, environmental incidents, internal uprisings, and attempts to subvert the government as exemplified by the uprising on June 23, 2023 in Rostov. This led the central authorities in Moscow to establish a state of emergency in certain regions of southern Russia. Due to its exceptional nature, martial law in Russia has been invoked only twice. The first instance occurred during World War II in response to the German invasion on June 22, 1941. The second instance occurred 81 years later on October 19, 2022, when President Putin declared it in the Oblast regions of Khabarovsk, Voronezh, Kursk, and Rostov, all located on the border with Ukraine. Additionally, martial law was applied in all Ukrainian areas currently under Russian occupation, such as Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhzhia, and Kherson. Although it is a legally exceptional instrument, recent months have shown that Putin has been approving a considerable series of laws and modifications with the aim of strengthening the provisions of martial law in Russia. This includes substantially harsher penalties for those who disregard the restrictions established by this law, and it is notable that Putin has also expanded the restrictions themselves. Faced with the new laws and changes that have come into effect since the beginning of the Russian invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, an eventual implementation of martial law throughout Russian territory today would imply even more draconian restrictions than those faced during the application of martial law in World War II. Among the new measures implemented, the imposition of forced labor in the defense industry stands out. Under this premise, the Russian government can requisition labor from other industrial sectors to be employed in the production of military equipment, compensating these workers only with the prevailing minimum wage and allowing a daily working period that, in exceptional circumstances, can extend up to 14 hours. The right to movement will face significant limitations, and it could even be abolished in certain regions. Additionally, the choice of place of residence cannot be made freely, requiring citizens to obtain special government permissions for relocations. The right to private property will also be suspended, allowing the government to acquire movable and immovable property with a predetermined compensation set by the government itself. In the realm of civil courts, there will be substantial restrictions, forcing citizens to accept the offered compensations, even if they are well below market value. The recent laws and amendments approved under Putin's leadership also establish the prohibition of seeking and disseminating information, except for those directly provided by the government. The period for which a person can be detained without formal charges has been extended to 30 days, which can be renewed multiple times during the duration of martial law. Furthermore, Putin expanded the so-called censorship law, which he himself sanctioned in March 2022, a few days after the invasion of Ukraine. The original text already had a repressive character, prohibiting negative expressions directed at the Russian armed forces and high-ranking politicians, especially Putin. In other words, uttering criticisms against Vladimir Putin or the Russian armed forces can result in a penalty of up to 7 years of imprisonment. In March 2023, the section dealing with fake news was reinforced, escalating punishments for those who share information categorized by the government as false. In a decision made this Tuesday, August 8th, Putin sanctioned a law that eliminates the obligation to notify the European Council about the implementation of martial law in Russia. Initially instituted to mitigate the risk of unexpected escalation of tensions with Europe, this law will no longer require Putin to inform his neighbors before declaring martial law on Russian territory. All these recent legislations and adjustments related to the implementation of martial law point to a strategy by Putin to set the stage for its adoption within Russian borders. As the legal provisions now impose substantially stricter restrictions than they did before, some analysts suppose that the underlying intention is to enable the widespread mobilization of reservists. Up until this point, Putin had only resorted to partial mobilizations to bolster his incursion into Ukraine, resulting in the incorporation of an additional force of nearly 300,000 reservists between September and December 2022. However, the burdens of this mobilization were considerable, with over 200,000 Russian citizens choosing to leave the country to avoid it. In this context, in August 2023, with the invasion approaching its 17th month and Russian forces entangled in increasingly intense conflicts, Putin might be seeking an additional supplement to promptly and unequivocally end the conflict, an achievement that perhaps can only be reached through a general mobilization. However, as previously mentioned, mobilizations, notably those of a general scope, are perceived negatively by society, as they separate young and adult individuals from their educational and occupational paths, and especially from their loved ones. The widespread mobilization, being such an impactful and trauma-laden episode, has the potential to generate unrest and uprisings. At this point, the modifications made to martial law come into play, granting Putin stricter control over any more substantial efforts of civil and military insurrection, including the armed revolt incited by Prigozhin on June 23rd, demonstrating to Putin the need to adopt more decisive and effective means to dominate not only the population, but also the military and even mercenaries discontent with the conduct of the conflict.